I bid you welcome.
To a new world of gods and monsters.
How do you like that, eh?
Even a man who's pure at heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the moon is full and bright.
I love dead. Hate living.
It's a perfect night for mystery and horror. The air itself is filled with monsters.
How do you do? We are about to unfold the story of Frankenstein. It is one of the strangest tales ever told. I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we've warned you.
Thus begins the 1931 horror masterpiece by James Whale. With a warning. Edward Van Sloan greets audiences with a glint of on-the-nose glee. Universal executives were right to add the warning. The masses had never seen anything like this before. Frankenstein thrilled, shocked, and horrified, all in equal measure. Sure, by today's standards, the film is mild-mannered. But to Depression-era audiences, Boris Karloff's monster scared the ever-living daylights out of folks, and people couldn't get enough of it. Universal had cinched another massive success that would change the world, perhaps more than any other film before it. Frankenstein's monster became an icon, and Boris Karloff became an overnight sensation. But the road to release was certainly bumpy, with many changes behind the scenes before it was stitched together into the wonderfully celebrated film it remains today. Considered by many to be the most famous Universal Monsters film, Frankenstein remains the gold standard of the Golden Age. I'm Ian the Wolfman, and this is the Monster Archives. Now, we all know that James Whale directed Frankenstein, and Boris Karloff starred as Henry Frankenstein's tragic monster. But we have to back up just a bit before that duo were attached to the picture. Hot on the heels of Universal's massively successful Dracula, starring Bela Lugosi, Junior Limley was feeling very happy with the state of things at the studio. Thriller pictures seemed to be the new hot-ticket item. In the spring of 1931, during a temporary shutdown of the studio due to the Great Depression, executives discussed potential projects for their new star, Bela Lugosi. They included adaptations of Mary Shelley's classic novel, Frankenstein, and Edgar Allan Poe's Murders in the Rue Morgue. On Tuesday, April 28, 1931, Carl Laemmle Jr. turned 23 years old. He'd been production manager for 2 years and had overseen the studio's massive successes, All Quiet on the Western Front and Dracula. As reported by Motion Picture Herald on May 2nd, following a meeting of the Universal Board of Directors in New York, Jr. became second vice president of Universal Studios. However, on May 1st, 3 days after Jr.'s birthday, as well as the day that Dracula had its second LA opening at the Hollywood Pantages, Warner Brothers released what many deemed a challenge to Universal's Dracula, the John Barrymore starring Svengali. While Svengali was more of a gothic romantic drama, its leading man certainly rivaled Lugosi's Dracula. Barrymore was no stranger to horror and thriller pictures. He had famously portrayed the dual role of Jekyll and Hyde in the infamous 1920 silent classic for Paramount Pictures. Barrymore made a whopping $150,000 payday, plus 10% of the gross receipts with a $50,000 advance. Lugosi's $3,500 payout for Dracula paled in comparison. But everyone remembers Dracula. How many times have you seen Svengali? Have you ever even heard of it? After his work on Dracula, Lugosi had worked on 3 other films in 1931. Fox's Women of All Nations and The Black Camel, alongside Charlie Chan, and Warner Brothers' Broad-Minded. But he played supporting roles in each of those. He wanted and needed another starring role. In the meantime, Universal City was reopening. On Saturday, May 9th, 1931, the Hollywood Filmograph listed Frankenstein among the films preparing at Universal. Bela Lugosi was listed to star, while 30-year-old Frenchman Robert Fleury was listed as director. Fleury had won acclaim in Hollywood for an 11-minute short titled The Life and Death of 9413, a Hollywood extra, in 1928. He claimed the final production cost was only $99. Surprisingly enough, Junior Limley did not appear to be fast-tracking Frankenstein. His vision was to have Lugosi as the monster, not the scientist title role that Lugosi expected. Fleury later claimed that he wanted Lugosi for the role of Henry Frankenstein, but it's unknown how valid that claim is. For the role of Henry, Universal was eyeing Leslie Howard, best remembered now for his role as Ashley Wilkes in Gone with the Wind in 1939, as well as 1934's The Scarlet Pimpernel. On May 16th, Hollywood's International Film Reporter headlined that Robert Fleury had signed a long-term contract with Universal. His likely first feature was to be Frankenstein. More and more reports regarding the film continued to be released for the following month. 10 days later, Motion Picture Herald headlined with 26 on Universal's new season schedule. Frankenstein was mentioned, with Bela Lugosi in the title role, adaptation by John L. Balderston and Peggy Webling. Fleury and Garrett Fort were writing their screenplay based on this adaptation. It would evolve over time, but many of the base elements of their first screenplay remained. Production was reported to be delayed until Junior returned from a trip to New York City. By mid-June, the LA Herald noted, "Due to free camera work, Bela Lugosi will appear 8 feet tall in his forthcoming characterization of Frankenstein." Lugosi was already growing angry and impatient with the thought of the heavy monster makeup and non-speaking performance. He said, "Anybody can moan and grunt. I need a part where I can act." It appears he attempted to reach a compromise with the makeup. As makeup artist Jack Pierce commented late in his life, Lugosi thought his ideas were better than everybody's. Bela had done his own makeup in Dracula. It's probable that Pierce was annoyed by that and wasn't keen on the idea of working with him on this picture. On Tuesday and Wednesday, June 16th and 17th, Robert Fleury was given an unofficial green light, presumably from Universal scenario editor Richard Schayer, in Junior's absence. Fleury began shooting his test for Frankenstein on the Dracula set on Stage 12, Universal's largest soundstage. Paul Ivanhoe filmed the test footage, the creation scene. Fleury looked back on that decision as a poor one because they did not yet have access to Kenneth Strickfaden's electrical equipment that became so integral to the Frankenstein series of films. Bela Lugosi was on set in monster makeup. Fellow Dracula alumni Edward Van Sloan as Dr. Waldman and Dwight Fry as Fritz were on set as well. This test sequence remains one of the most controversial in film history. There are many questions regarding the test, as it is now lost. The biggest is obviously, what did Lugosi's monster makeup look like? The most famous description came from an 82-year-old Edward Van Sloan in 1964, being interviewed by Forrest J. Ackerman. Lugosi was made up to look like the Golem, that Bela's head was about 4 times normal size, with a broad wig on it, and that he had a polished, clay-like skin. Robert Florey always maintained that the test makeup was identical to Boris Karloff's in the finished film. He claimed that Bela hated the neck electrodes, which Florey claimed was his idea. This claim was backed up by Paul Ivanhoe. Regardless of the he said, she said, the test did not make Lugosi any more comfortable with the role. He spent nearly the entire test sequence under the sheet, laying upon the laboratory table. Stock performers played Henry Frankenstein and Victor Moritz. Bela came to life as the monster does, stirring beneath the sheet and moving his arm, like Karloff in the film. Paul Ivanhoe stated that all Bela did was open his eyes, look to the camera, and move a few fingers on one hand. Van Sloan offered a negative analysis of Lugosi's test, saying the monster was like something out of Babes in Toyland. We'll never know for sure the truth of all the differing stories and opinions regarding the test footage, unless, by some miracle, it is found. Greg Mink notes the best evidence for the truth. First of all, consider Florey, Pierce, Bela each had an ego, an agenda, and a reputation to protect. The only one who had nothing to gain or lose in his account was old Van Sloan, who wasn't too pleased to learn he was well remembered for those horror movies anyway. Mink points out that Lugosi would have been familiar with the makeup of the Golem, because he had been working in German cinema about the time Der Golem was filmed. In a 1966 interview with Castle of Frankenstein magazine, number 9, Karloff said that although he'd never seen a picture of the Lugosi makeup, I was once told that he insisted on doing his makeup himself and did this awful hairy creature, not at all like our monster. Karloff's source on this information is believed to be close friend Jack Pierce. This may also allude to the Golem-style makeup. Finally, the Lugosi test sequence was filmed in mid-June. Jack Pierce and Boris Karloff's experiments weren't until the first few weeks of August. Both Pierce and Karloff claimed they met every night for 3 weeks in the makeup bungalow to create the infamous monster makeup. If the Lugosi makeup was the same as Karloff's, why would it be necessary for the pair to work on their own makeup vision for nearly 3 entire weeks? One thing that was reported on pretty much unanimously was Lugosi's temper during the test shoot. Florey recalled Bela storming off the set in a fit, barking, "Enough is enough. I will not be a grunting, babbling idiot for anybody," and "I was a star in my country and I will not be a scarecrow over here." However, Paul Ivanhoe contradicted that sentiment. He seemed to recall Bela liking the test, talking about his profile, and celebrating by lighting up a cigar, which was absolutely in character for Lugosi. The bottom line was this, however. Nobody's opinion truly mattered besides Carl Jr. As the story goes, after viewing the test footage, he laughed like a hyena. It seemed that Lugosi was safe for the time being, as many actors made poor test scenes. Florey, on the other hand. On June 29th, 3 days after Bela Lugosi took his oath as an American citizen, Elizabeth Yeaman wrote in the Hollywood Daily Citizen, "Just as soon as James Whale has finished Waterloo Bridge, he will start working out plans for Frankenstein. Bela Lugosi, you know, will be starred in this production. Lugosi is all set for a whole series of weird pictures, the next of which will be Frankenstein." Little did Bela know that James Whale's addition to the film was about to deal a crushing blow to his surefire career. A few moving pieces led to Florey being dropped as director and Whale getting the position. First, as Whale had completed production on Waterloo Bridge for $50,000 under budget, as well as a day early. Junior was absolutely thrilled by this, as well as the quality of the film. It was right around the same time that Florey had filmed the test sequence with Lugosi for Frankenstein. Now, Junior dropped Florey due to the poor test footage, or due to the fact that gold standard James Whale wanted to direct it then. More than likely, both of these instances were true. It appears that Whale saw the test footage as well, but we'll never know exactly what he thought of it. But, by June 29th, 1931, James Whale was the official new director of Frankenstein. After Robert Florey had been shafted by the studio, he was further disappointed when Junior and/or Whale had his writing credit removed from Frankenstein. Florey then had to provide a formal appeal to have his credit returned. It proved too late to have his name added to US prints and posters. He would only receive credit on printed ads in Europe. But historians believe that Florey's vision for Frankenstein may have been too hyper-focused on style, missing the most important core elements of the story. James Whale seemed to understand the possibilities of the horror story. Here's a quote from him. "Frankenstein was a sensational story and had a chance to become a sensational picture. It seems from Jump Street, Whale had little interest in having Bela Lugosi in the picture as the monster or Henry Frankenstein. In James Curtis's book, A New World of Gods and Monsters, the late Gavin Lambert, who had befriended and interviewed Whale, recalled, he talked about the fact that Lugosi was basically scary and scared audiences, and he said the monster, in his view, although he could scare people, was also scared. Still, for some time, Lugosi's name remained in publicity. The July 5, 1931 edition of the New York Times reported that Whale was set to direct, while Lugosi was set for the main role. But it wasn't to be. Bela Lugosi, after all, had blown the screen test as the monster. There was plenty of drama behind the scenes at Universal as things began to shift. Whale had no intention of using Lugosi in the picture, but the entire film had been planned for Lugosi in the first place. Ultimately, Junior sided with Whale. The studio announced in the July 18, 1931 edition of the Hollywood Filmograph that Florey and Lugosi were being shifted to Murders in the Rue Morgue, with inference that Bela had disliked the monster role. Surely this didn't bother Lugosi, right? After all, he had already been set for Rue Morgue after Frankenstein. It appears that Universal sensed the possibility of offending their new Dracula star. In a possible attempt to appease Lugosi, rumblings of a talky remake of The Hunchback of Notre Dame starring him as Quasimodo began to spread. Response was not particularly positive. Elizabeth Yeaman wrote in the July 20th, 1931 edition of the Hollywood Daily Citizen, "I hope this plan falls through, for I would hate to see anyone attempt to equal the performance of Lon Chaney in this picture." We'll never truly know how Lugosi felt through this matter. He put on a good face, but it was sure to be confusing. Junior Limley wasn't up to bat for him, and James Whale seemed as though he couldn't care less about Bela. But Lugosi stuck to his guns, insisting the role of the monster was a scarecrow and a half-wit extra. Still, historians believe the matter hurt Lugosi deeply. But James Whale was already on the lookout for the perfect candidate to encapsulate his vision of the monster, one that could scare, while also projecting the notion that it, too, was scared. As fate would have it, it wouldn't be long before Whale would discover his monster, bumping into him quite literally. But before we get to the story of how Boris Karloff was cast as the monster, the remainder of the main cast was chosen. Now, we know Junior Limley wanted Leslie Howard for the role of Henry Frankenstein, the titular medical student dropout, not a doctor. In fact, the first actual Dr. Frankenstein in history is Basil Rathbone's Wolf von Frankenstein in Universal's second sequel to the original, Son of Frankenstein, in 1939. Whale had a different actor in mind for the role of the eager and blasphemous scientist. His Journey End star, Colin Clive. Of Clive, Whale said, "I chose Colin Clive for Frankenstein because he had exactly the right kind of tenacity to go through with anything, together with the kind of romantic quality which makes strong men leave civilization to shoot big game. There was also a level-headedness about Clive which keeps him in full control of himself, even in his craziest moments in the picture." The Henry Frankenstein star was born Colin Glenn Clive Grieg to English Colonel Colin Philip Grieg and Caroline Margaret Lugard Clive. He was born on January 20th, 1900 in Saint Malo, France. Clive's mother was a member of the aristocratic Clive family. In a 1935 interview, he stated that his mother had moved to France to escape the tumult of the ongoing Second Boer War. His family intended for him to follow his father's footsteps in a military career. He attended Stonyhurst College and the Royal Military College, Sandhurst, where he broke both of his knees after being thrown from and crushed by a horse. While recovering from his injuries, Clive decided to become an actor. He was a member of the Hull Repertory Theatre Company for 3 years. Colin Clive created the role of Steve Baker, the white husband of the racially mixed Julie Laverne, in the first London production of Showboat. That production also featured Cedric Hardwicke and Paul Robeson. The following year, Clive was cast as Captain Stanhope in James Whale's stage production of Journey's End at the Savoy Theatre. We know that Clive reprised the role in the 1930 film adaptation, his first screen role. Clive was an in-demand leading man. In 1934, he starred alongside Virginia Bruce in the 1934 adaptation of Jane Eyre. Unfortunately, Clive was not a fan of his horror roles. He preferred more serious dramatic roles, only settling for horror pictures for financial reasons and because he knew those roles were popular with audiences. Clive was married to Jean de Casalis in June 1929. By 1935, the couple were living separately, with Clive in LA and de Casalis in London. Colin Clive notably suffered from severe chronic alcoholism. He died from complications of tuberculosis on June 25, 1937, at the age of 37. Forrest J. Ackerman recalled visiting Clive's body. Quote, "I actually saw him in death, lying in a bed at a mortuary where it was possible for the public to view his body. He looked remarkably as he had when lying in bed in The Bride of Frankenstein." End quote. Over 300 mourners turned out to pay their respects. Peter Lorre was one of the pallbearers. Clive's remains were cremated and returned to England. His cenotaph is located at the Chapel of the Pines Crematory. Finally, John Bowles was cast as Victor Moritz, Henry's best friend. Now, I want to pause here a bit to discuss the name changes. In the original novel by Mary Shelley, Frankenstein's first name is Victor, while his best friend is Henry Clerval. And the Frankenstein's servant and caretaker to Victor's younger brother William is Justine Moritz. A lot of fans believe that Frankenstein's name was changed from Victor to Henry first in the Universal film. There's a somewhat vague report on IMDb that suggests Victor Frankenstein was renamed Henry for the movie because it was decided Victor would sound too severe and unfriendly to American audiences at the time. Now, part of that notion may be accurate, but the name was first changed in a stage adaptation by Peggy Webling. That play's script is what Universal took much inspiration from. Peggy Webling was born on January 1st, 1871 in Westminster. Webling was a playwright from a relatively young age. She was well respected, reportedly rubbing elbows with the likes of Lewis Carroll. Webling wrote a few shows over her career, but got a special request from Hamilton Dean who'd written and produced the stage adaptation of Dracula. Webling was asked to create a stage version of Frankenstein. The play, titled Frankenstein, An Adventure in the Macabre, premiered in December of 1927 alongside Dracula. The double bill was a success and toured the UK for 2 years. Frankenstein eventually transferred to London in 1930, where it ran for 72 performances. Webling made a number of noteworthy changes to the story, including the use of alchemy, as well as changing the name to Henry. Frankenstein's friend also took the name Victor here. The monster is first presented as childlike and misunderstood here, growing and maturing as the story progresses. He also tragically drowns a child in the adaptation while only trying to play. The show ends with the monster being struck by lightning after murdering Henry. Perhaps most noteworthy is the fact that both Henry and the monster were referred to as Frankenstein in the stage adaptation. In 1931, at the end of the play's London run, Webling was contacted by Universal to purchase the rights to her adaptation. She negotiated a $20,000 advance for the rights, as well as a 1% royalty payment from the gross earnings of any films based on the play. John L. Balderston readapted the play, apparently referring to Webling's script as illiterate and crude. Suffice it to say, much of the bones of the classic film we all know and love owes a lot to Peggy Webling. Universal's Frankenstein would be a very different monster entirely, if not for her. Now, back to the cast of James Whale's picture. Whale requested his star of Waterloo Bridge to be tested. The director said, "I asked for May Clark for Elizabeth because of her intelligence, fervor, and sincere belief that Frankenstein would claim the public's interest." Clark joined the cast officially in August of 1931. It appears, however, that she had some doubts regarding the merit of the role. She noted, "Waterloo Bridge was definitely for me, but Frankenstein was not. It was a great thing to be connected with. It's always nice to be in a success, but it didn't really give me any scenes to play. I remember thinking, oh well, at least it's Whale and the same people I loved. I'll enjoy myself, and it's going to be a prominent film." After May Clark, only the part of the monster remained. Although the validity of this claim could be questioned, later in life, John Carradine had this to say regarding his chance at playing the monster. "I've never played a monster. I was offered one and turned it down. I turned down Frankenstein, and Boris took it. They sent me to the makeup department, and the makeup man started mixing up a bowl of plaster, and I, being a sculptor, knew just what he was up to, a life mask. I said, 'Wait a minute, what is this?' He said, 'You play a monster.' I said, 'Oh, do I have any dialogue?' 'No, you just grunt.' 'This is not for me,' I said, and walked out. I never regretted it." The inability to find a suitable actor for the monster was causing more than a little concern for James Whale and company. Call it what you will, fate, destiny, divine intervention, but Karloff's life was about to change forever. During the filming of his latest assignment, Graft, Boris Karloff made his way to the Universal Commissary. Here's Karloff's recollection in his own words. "I was having lunch, and James Whale sent either the first assistant or maybe it was his secretary over to me and asked me to join him for a cup of coffee after lunch, which I did. He asked me if I would make a test for him tomorrow. 'What for?' I asked. 'For a damned awful monster,' he said. Of course, I was delighted because it meant another job if I was able to land it. Actually, that's all it meant to me. At the same time, I felt rather hurt because at the time I had on a very good straight makeup and my best suit, and he wanted to test me for a monster." Karloff told a slightly different version of the story in other interviews. He claimed Whale was lunching at a nearby table in the commissary. Boris caught his eye and called him over himself. There are variations of the story, but most historians claim the general circumstance is most plausible. Although, there are more than a few others that claim to have had a hand in helping discover Karloff for the role. David Lewis claimed, after seeing Karloff in the role of Galloway at the Belasco Theater, he was so impressed that Boris never left his mind. Lewis finally saw Karloff in The Criminal Code and eventually suggested him to James Whale. Lewis claimed that Jimmy said, "Boris who?" He hadn't even heard of him. Even Bela Lugosi, in a 1935 interview, claimed credit for Karloff's discovery. Quote, "I made up the role and had tests taken which were pronounced okay," he said. "Then I read the script and didn't like it, so I asked to be withdrawn from the picture. Carl Laemmle said he'd permit it if I'd furnish an actor to play the part. I scouted agencies and came upon Boris Karloff. I recommended him. He took tests, and that's how he happened to become a famous monster of horror pictures. My rival, in fact." End quote. Lugosi stuck to that story forever. In 1953, Lugosi shared this take. "After I did Dracula at Universal, they wanted me to do the monster in Frankenstein. But when I tested the makeup, it was heavy and painful. Then I read the script. I didn't have a word of dialogue. I got out of the role by having my doctor say it would be bad for me. I suggested Karloff for the role. You might say I created my own Frankenstein monster. Competition for horror roles." End quote. Regardless of the many claims, Karloff was set for a test as the monster. To prepare, he was sent to Jack Pierce, who had once again been called upon to create the monster makeup. This was the beginning of a beautiful, close friendship between Karloff and Pierce. Here's Karloff in his own words. "Jack was nothing short of a genius, besides being a lovely man. So, at the end of the day's work on graft, I would stay, and he would stay, and nightly he worked on the makeup until we felt it was ready. People in production were constantly calling and saying, 'Aren't you ready yet?' And we would answer, 'No, we're not ready yet.'" Pierce stalled production to the benefit of Karloff to ensure they had more than enough time to perfect the design. In total, it was about 3 weeks of stalling once Karloff was offered the test. According to Pierce, during the 4 months of work he put into the monster design, he made hundreds of sketches and models, and a life-size mold. He purposely ignored Mary Shelley's description in the novel, which reads, "His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful, great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness. But these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed almost of the same color as the dun-white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips." Pierce finally submitted just one sketch, which was approved. In an interview given during the production of Son of Frankenstein in 1938, the makeup artist described in detail how he brought the monster to life. "I figured that Frankenstein, who was a scientist but no practicing surgeon, would take the simplest surgical way. He would cut the top of the skull off straight across like a pot lid, hinge it, pop the brain in, and then clamp it on tight. That is the reason I decided to make the monster's head square and flat like a shoebox, and dig that big scar across his forehead with the metal clamps holding it together. Those 2 metal studs sticking out the sides of the monster's neck are inlets for electricity, plugs such as we use for lamps or flat irons. Remember, the monster is an electrical gadget. Lightning is his life force. He carries a 5-pound steel spine that you can't see to represent the rod which conveys the current up to the monster's brain. Here's another thing. I read that the Egyptians used to bind some criminals hand and foot and bury them alive. When their blood turned to water after death, it flowed into their extremities, stretched their arms to gorilla length, and swelled their hands, feet, and faces to abnormal proportions. I thought this might make a nice touch for the monster, since he was supposed to be made up from the corpses of executed felons. So I fixed Karloff up that way. I made his arms look longer by shortening the sleeves of his coat, stiffened his legs with 2 pairs of pants over steel struts, and covered Karloff's face with blue-green grease paint, which photographs gray. I blackened his fingernails with shoe polish." End quote. Karloff also had a partial bridge work on his right side, which he removed, allowing himself to suck in his cheek. Pierce added makeup there to give the monster's face an even more cadaverous appearance. The makeup was nearly complete, but Karloff still felt something was missing. Karloff himself suggested that his eyes needed to appear more lifeless, so Pierce added mortician's wax to his eyelids to make them heavy and half-seeing. Director James Whale had also been involved with the monster's design. He made drawings of Karloff's head, adding sharp, bony ridges where he imagined the skull might have joined. Whale also added 2 large clamps to the forehead of the monster that fans now refer to as horns. There's still a rather recognizable still shot of Karloff in this test makeup available to see. In fact, that look was used by artist Carolee Gross for the film's first theatrical poster, horns and all. That still photo was also used as the reference for the 1991 Classic Collection VHS release, with the clamps removed. Ultimately, prior to filming, the clamps were removed for simplicity. Notably, Carolee Gross also made contributions to the look of the monster. David J. Scull notes in his book, The Monster Show, that Gross first introduced the notion of a steel bolt through the neck, a detail that in itself would come to symbolize the total Frankenstein mythos. Gross's concept art still exists in the Library of Congress. You can find the image on the artist's Wikipedia page. To add height to the monster, Karloff wore a pair of asphalt spreader's boots. Karloff recalled, "The boots weighed about 16 pounds apiece. All told, the entire outfit weighed about 40 to 45 pounds. Karloff pondered how effective the makeup would be. As he readied for a screen test, he recalled, "I was thinking this, practicing my walk, as I rounded a bend in the corridor and came face to face with this prop man. He was the first man to see the monster. I watched to study his reaction. It was quick to come. He turned white, gurgled, and lunged out of sight down the corridor. Never saw him again. Poor chap. I would have liked to thank him. He was the audience that first made me feel like the monster." Universal had found their monster. It was a long and winding road, but Boris Karloff was poised to create something that was a far cry from the original idea that Bela Lugosi had been attached to. There was still some script work to polish, but the entire cast and crew were ready to move into full-on production. But production wouldn't be a walk in the park. There was plenty of drama, injuries, disagreements, and more. Frankenstein was coming to life, and it was more than monstrous. Stay tuned for the production and release history of Universal's original horror show, covered in the next episode. This episode of the Monster Archives was written and produced by me, Ian Bates. For more on the Monster Archives, including scheduling updates and news, be sure to follow @Universal Studios Monsters on Instagram. And thank you for listening.